Statistically, Mats Zuccarello was pretty similar this year as opposed to last season, but boy, was his year up and down. We discuss on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we evaluate Mats Zuccarello's 2022-2023 season. We'll look at the stats, the underlying numbers, the splits for Zuccarello, which told a very different story to his overall stats. We'll look at Zuccarello's contract situation and what's next for the Lizard King heading into next season. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and as you can hear, we are a little bit closer to regular setup, which is great because when technology doesn't work, there's nothing worse. So we're glad to be back to relatively normal here today. And we're going to take a look at Mats Zuccarello's 2022-2023 season because there were 5 or 6 different runs, it felt like, during this season for Zuccarello. And it tells a very different story if you look at what he did statistically this year. Tells a very different story when you kind of break it up into chunks of the season as to how effective he was throughout the course of the year. Zuccarello finished the season with a 67-point mark, 22 goals, 45 assists. And so in 78 games, he had 67 points. 67 points is his second best season ever in terms of points. Just lower than last season, in which he finished the year with 79. Went from a plus 21 to a minus 3 this year. Penalties, he ended up with 26 penalty minutes this year, which is nowhere near his career high in that category. But the interesting one was his shots, a career high with 198, and shot 11%, which was 4% lower than last season. And that is actually his lowest mark as a member of the Minnesota Wild. He had a career high in ice time per game with 20 minutes, 12 seconds. And in terms of power play time, had 9 power play goals and 20 power play assists. So 29 points on the power play for Zuccarello here this season. And those point totals are great, but it felt like there was a lot left on the table. And if you look at the splits of the season, Zuccarello had really a couple of good months. And beyond that was relatively quiet. He started the season in October with 5 goals, 7 assists for 12 total points as the Wild tried to dig out of an early season slump. He matched that. He followed that up, I should say, with 8 points in November, 2 goals and 6 assists. The month of December was Zuccarello's best. 9 goals, 11 assists. He had 20 points in the month of December, which included a hat trick against the Chicago Blackhawks. He had 5 multi-point games over the course of the month of December and shot 19% on the month. So a tremendous month of December for Mats Zuccarello, by far his best of the season. When you flip the calendar to 2023, that's where things start to get a little concerning. Zuccarello, 8 points in January. He had 3 goals and 5 assists. The month of February, Zuccarello had 1 goal, 8 assists, 9 total points in the month of February. And then in the month of March, had 2 goals, 6 assists, and 8 total points. And then in April, just 2 assists in the final 5 games. That carried over into the postseason. Zuccarello had a fantastic Game 3. He scored 2 goals and helped the Wild win that game 5-1. But beyond that, he had 3 total points in the other 5 games, and by and large was in negative territory every night of the series. Now, the big thing that happened at the end of the year that impacted Zuccarello's numbers was obviously the loss of Kirill Kaprizov. His line mates, those two have, we talk about the next level chemistry for Kaprizov and Zuccarello, their ability to find each other on just these otherworldly passes. And so with Kaprizov on the shelf, that absence was notable in that Zuccarello's production substantially dropped. And Zuccarello even talked about it at the end of the season, in that he was just kind of in a rut in terms of both energy and just overall confidence in his game as the season wore on, which is not super inspiring, not great to hear, but he's a guy who's a great playmaker on this team. He is definitely more of a passer than a scorer. And so it was a disappointing season, I think, for Zuccarello, coming off of what he did last season, where had he not gotten hurt and missed the final 10-ish games of the season, had he not gotten hurt, he probably would have broken the all-time points record per season as well. And it could have been him that broke the all-time single-season assists record for the Minnesota Wild as well. And so there obviously are some questions with age for Zuccarello. He did play in a season high, at least from a Wild perspective, in games, and he has been trending higher and higher in that department over the last couple of years. And so you look at him as an age 35 player, and what can you expect from Zuccarello going forward? Are we finally getting to that point where he maybe is at the top of the mountain and is starting to maybe come back down the other end? It's not to say Zuccarello can't be a productive player for this Minnesota Wild team, but I think it underscores how important Kaprizov is to his production and to allowing him to see the whole ice and to create some dynamic plays. So all in all, it was a relatively good season for Zuccarello, depending on how you look at it. There just obviously was a lot of disappointment with how the playoffs ended. Put him on the list amongst many of the others of players that just simply did not bring it in the series against the Dallas Stars. So a frustrating end of the season. Obviously, with Zuccarello having a couple of seasons left, including this upcoming season on his contract, there are questions to look into there as well. So we will move next to letter grades. We'll take a look at Zuccarello as far as an offensive and everything else perspective goes, and we will hand out some grades as to how he did throughout the course of the season. That is on the way here on today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, the ones that join us every single day of the week, you can tune in for Ryan Hartman's season eval tomorrow as well as finishing out the week with Jared Spurgeon and Jake Middleton as well. So tune in for that coming up later this week here on Locked On Wild. And a big thank you to everybody that tunes in each and every day of the week. So let's hand out some letter grades for Mats Zuccarello. Again, we're going to go offense, defense, special teams, and we will go overall grade as well. We'll factor postseason into it as well. For Zuccarello, I just looking at what he did, and when you look at it month by month, it definitely tells a story. I'm going to go offensively. I think I'm going to go with a B- for Zuccarello for offense here this season. Now, he obviously put up right around what his career averages are in terms of points. So it's not like he had a huge drop off in terms of what he was able to do here in Minnesota. And you put it up, and it's amongst one of the best seasons he's had statistically in his career. It just felt like it was mostly 1 month. So I'm going to go B- on the offensive side of the puck. On the defensive side of the puck, much like with Kirill Kaprizov, you're not putting this line on the ice to try to slow anybody down. You're putting them on the ice to try to score as many goals as possible. So I'm going to give him a C as well. It's you're not putting Zuccarello in a position to try to lock anybody down. And with the lack of that true shutdown line like we saw 2 years ago, we saw everybody get a little more exposed, especially in 5-on-5 scoring, because it just was such a difficulty trying to get goals in the net with this team in 5-on-5. For the special teams, Zuccarello, one of the better passers on the power play, but one of the guys that passes too much. That is, I think, the single thing that is most frustrating about this special teams unit is that there's just this tendency to overpass and to just live on the perimeter. Well, it turns out it's hard to score goals if you don't send it towards the net. And I know the loss of Joel Eriksson Ek not only impacted the penalty kill, but it impacted the power play as well, because you don't have that net front guy to deflect, to pick up rebounds, to everything else. But you can't score if you don't shoot the puck. And seeing just perimeter passing in the latter stages of the series against the Dallas Stars was equal parts infuriating and equal parts just sad, I think, in that you're just more content to play catch on the outer parts of the zone than you are to try to, I don't know, shoot. So for Zuccarello, I mean, 29 power play points throughout the regular season is impressive. And so I think I'm going to go with a B on special teams, just because he was one of the more regular contributors to that top power play unit. And a B can be good while also taking into account some of the postseason miscues. Speaking of postseason grade for Zuccarello, I'm probably going to go with a D. Just outside of one game, D+. Outside of one game, really didn't get a ton from the Lizard King in that postseason series against the Dallas Stars. And so I'm going to go with a D+ for the sole reason of being one of the big impact guys in the Game 5 win. But beyond that, really not a factor at all. And yes, the laundry list of guys that were dealing with injuries was quite lengthy as the postseason rolled on, but it's the playoffs. If you can walk, you're playing. And knowing that, if you are not 100%, you got to try to find a way to overcome that. And so factoring all of those in, B- on offense, B on special teams, C on defense, D+ on in the postseason. I'm going to go C+ for Zuccarello this year. I still, even though the point total was right in line, he fell off the face of the earth at the end of the season, and that really impacted this team. So I'm going to weigh that in as these letter grades come about. And so for Zuccarello, it's going to be an opportunity next year to try to prove that this was not a trend. This wasn't the start of a trend down the mountain. If he can prove that he still has a couple of solid seasons left in the tank, then his grade next year will be better. But for this year, we're going C+ for Zuccarello and his performance in 2022-2023. Now let's look ahead at what Zuccarello has in store from a contract perspective and what the future holds for Mats Zuccarello. We'll take a look at all of that as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Attention, active individuals. Are you tired of sacrificing comfort for style when it comes to your activewear? Introducing Bird Dogs, the game changer in athletic shorts. With their unique built-in liner, these shorts offer ultimate support and flexibility, ensuring you stay comfortable during even the most intense workouts. Here is the best part, though. Bird Dogs are more than just workout gear. They're versatile enough to take you from the gym to the street without skipping a beat. Designed with pockets that actually work, Bird Dogs give you ample space to store your essentials when you're on the move. And guess what? No more chafing or discomfort. Bird Dogs are made with premium, breathable fabric that keeps you cool and dry throughout your activities. It's like wearing a hug. Whether you're hitting the trail, crushing it at the gym, or simply lounging around the house, Bird Dogs are the shorts you've been searching for. Don't settle for ordinary shorts. Upgrade to Bird Dogs and experience a whole new level of performance and comfort. Best of all, when you head to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl and enter promo code LOCKEDONNHL, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Everydayers, Ryan Hartman is next in our player evals here as we move throughout the offseason. And don't worry, we'll be working in some other topics as well, trying to keep everything at the top of the page in terms of where the Wild are at, what they need to do as we navigate through the rest of the offseason. Let's navigate through the rest of Mats Zuccarello's contract and his situation going forward for the Minnesota Wild. Zuccarello has 2 years left on his deal at $6 million per season. He has a modified no trade clause and no move clause. The modified no trade began this season. And so what he does is he submits a 10-team no trade list to the Wild, and those teams are off limits. With the fact that Zuccarello has 2 seasons left on his deal, the question of whether or not he gets re-signed after that extension is done is definitely coming into the forefront, because here's the thing. Zuccarello's 35 right now. If this is the start of the decline of his skill set to where he's not able to, as the season wears on, give you that consistent production like he was even a season ago, if we're starting to see Father Time catch up, then it's probably an easier no to re-sign Zuccarello to an extension, because you're going to want to get somebody into that wing spot on your top line. You're going to want to get somebody in there that is productive, that is able to bring you some speed, able to bring you a bunch of different things that an aging veteran may not be able to bring you as regularly as they have in the past. So we could be looking at the final 2 seasons of Mats Zuccarello in a Wild uniform. And it's been an interesting tenure for Zuccarello throughout his Wild career so far. It started off looking like a contract that was going to come back to bite the Wild. Zuccarello didn't really fit in with what the Wild were doing, was injured early on, and as soon as Kirill Kaprizov got here, it flipped like you're flipping on a switch, and had the fantastic season last year. Unfortunately, he got hurt down the stretch to where he was not nearly as effective against the Blues as he was in the regular season, missed a bunch of games down the stretch as well. And so you look at that now, and are we going to get something closer to the first half of the season or last year? Or are we going to get something that is more similar to the second half of this season, where you just have a bunch of games, a handful of games, where a guy like Zuccarello just does not show up on the score sheet hardly at all? That's a problem, especially for a team that right now is way more veteran heavy than they are young players. The hope is that if you inject some youth into this lineup over the next couple of seasons, that can start to kind of get you back on track offensively, to where you're not having to try to pick and choose your spots. You're able to sustain more presence and score more goals. But this is the other side of the coin, in that it was likely that there was going to be regression for a lot of guys from last season's roster, and we saw it. We'll get through all the rest of the guys on the team in their evals, but there were a lot of guys that regressed this season, and Zuccarello certainly was one of them. So big offseason questions for Zuccarello heading into next season is, what does he look like going into next year? Do we see a little bit more aggression from him? Do we see a little bit more of an attack mentality from him? Or do we see him and Kaprizov essentially play catch out there for large portions of the season? That is a really big one, because he's a good player when he puts his mind to it. It's just, there were several instances down the stretch this year where the play just was not good. And so Bill Guerin will be watching over these next couple of seasons to see what exactly Zuccarello looks like. If he rebounds a little bit, then maybe you sign him to a 1 or 2 year extension for less than that $6 million average annual value. If you do that for, say, 2025, 2026 and beyond, maybe that would be a possibility. But here's the other thing too, is what got the Wild into this situation with the salary cap the way that it is because they threw a ton of money at guys, and at the end of the contract, they didn't produce at the similar level to where they were at the beginning of the deals. That's something you deal with every free agent contract. And so as you move out of Parise Suter, do you want to just start throwing money at older veterans to fill that cap up? Or do you try to get some guys that are younger to come in and inject some life into this roster? A lot of questions for Bill Guerin as to how this is going to look, how this is going to play. The hope would be that you take more of those roster spots, you build from within, and then when, as we've talked about on this show, for the everydayers that tune in, the hope is that you build from within, and then you use that cap space to fill a spot here, a spot there as you need it, as opposed to, and you need veterans on a roster. I'm not disputing that, but it all comes down to these next 2 seasons for Zuccarello. If he keeps it at a consistent production level, then he is very much in line for a potential short-term extension. But if he, then it's at that point, it's time to move on. So it was statistically not too bad of a season for Zuccarello, but there is a lot more to dig into beyond that which is why he got a little bit lower of a grade this year than you may have expected. But that is, I think, going to be a trend for a lot of guys on this roster, is just didn't quite hit that same level that they did in previous seasons. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Thank you for tuning in. If you are a first-time listener, we welcome you to Locked On Wild and hope to see you again on tomorrow's show. Make sure you take the opportunity to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new videos throughout the week. If you're an everydayer, once again, thank you for your continued support. We'll catch up with you again on tomorrow's show. Either way, make sure you subscribe and follow along because we have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.